Welcome to this exciting session on creating low-code extensions for Power BI and Microsoft Fabric with Power Apps. I'm super excited to get to present this session at the Scottish Summit, and I have a lot of great things in store for you guys. So I hope you're in for a bit of a ride and tour de force through all the cool things you can do to extend your Fabric and Power BI solutions. First of all, a huge thank you to all the sponsors making this event possible: Proximo3, Locodera, Riata Consultancy, and Cubix. Make sure to pay those guys a visit. They're the ones who make these kinds of events possible. Quickly about me before jumping into the actual session. My name is Jon Voge. Sometimes I also use Stjernegård, but it's a long, weird Danish name in the middle, and not too often I get to say that. But I'm a senior consultant with Inspire, a Danish-based consultancy. I'm based in Copenhagen myself as well, and I really thrive in the intersection between Fabric and the Power Platform. That's where I do most of my work. So it's perfect to get to present a session that covers both of these topics. I started out as a Power BI developer, expanded on that with some Power Platform, all the natural integrations to automate and apps that we get in that sphere, and now trying to take on Fabric as well and taking sort of the data analyst perspective on how we can do more things in Fabric as analysts. Then in my free time, I spend a lot of time on my bicycle, and I love learning new board games. So if you got a good recommendation, feel free to find me. If you have any questions about this session, now that this is a recorded session, please do reach out to me. Find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message. I would love to hear from you if you have questions or ideas or use cases. Those are very, very welcome. There'll be links at the end of the description as well to my GitHub, where you can find supplying information. And also some of the things that I'm talking about today are also occasionally featured in some blogs that I do in my blog, downhilldata.com. With those things out of the way, just going to give you guys a brief introduction to what we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to first take a little bit of a stab at why even bother building extensions for Power BI reports and for Fabric. And then we're going to go into 3 different live demos where I'll show you, not necessarily built from the bottom up, 3 different Power Apps in 45 minutes. That's a little ambitious, but I'll show you 3 different Power Apps, and I'll show you how they're built, trying to zoom in on the things that may be challenging if you're not that used to building Power Apps embedded in Power BI, and just going to give you the most important tips and tricks for you to get started yourself. So without further ado, a little bit of motivation for this topic. Why even talk about embedding Power Apps inside of Fabric and Power BI? And I think it's a pretty natural progression for a lot of analysts when they start working with Power BI, that eventually you'll come across the scenario that somebody asks you, can we allow end users to provide some kind of input here? It might be that you're simply being asked to add a comment of some sort. It might be that you are asked to input more complex values, or it might be that you're simply trying to do a whole other thing that I haven't even considered. Power BI is, great at data visualization and great at presenting a data model to a more digestible format, but it's not really great at inputs, right? But luck is with us that the Power Platform suite, namely especially Power Apps, really work well in unison with Power BI, and it's very easy to get started with building integrations between those platforms and enhance the capabilities of Power BI reports and Power BI reports built on a Fabric foundation. So with that said, let me just show a couple of examples of what I mean, then we will have a little more context for talking about these things. I'm just going to jump into my browser here and show you that I have here a simple Power BI report. This Power BI report is built on a Contoso data model that lives in a Fabric data warehouse, and it's using direct lake storage mode for all its connections. So data here is more or less live, and what you see on the left-hand side, standard Power BI stuff, right? I'm basically just showing a sum of quantity over time and split up by, well, in this case, I've drilled down through country and product and down into address. And that should be pretty understandable, I think, for most Power BI users. On the right-hand side of the screen is where all the Power Platform stuff comes to life. I have here 3 embedded apps. I also have an embedded flow that, if we have time at the end, I might show you a little bit of a teaser. But since it's the app extensions that are in focus today, I'll just explain these in a little more detail. So the top one here is a comment app, which allows us to comment on a specific data point in a Power BI report. So this app right here, it's context aware, filter aware. If I click on an item in my table over here, you'll notice that the address field here will change. So right now it says something Davis Court. If I select Kennedy Court over here, when this little fella is done spinning, you'll notice that the address just changed. We'll get back to how that's done in a second, but I just want to demo these apps first. So now that I've selected a data point, I can add comment for Kennedy's, not street, but court. I can submit this data. And now that data point, that comment has been saved just for Kennedy Court. It will not display for any other data points in my report. It will display for Kennedy Court. And this is a much more powerful comment feature than the one which is built in to the existing Power BI service. So maybe people don't realize this, but there is comment functionality in the Power BI service. You can tag people and you can comment on what you see, but it's not great at understanding the filters that you've applied. So if you want to tie a comment to a specific data point and potentially even use that comment for something else down the line, this feature is useless. But that's what we can do with this little comment app. So that's one of the 3 use cases that I'll show you how we can build today. The other one that's a little interesting here is the middle one, which is an elaboration of sorts on the top one. Instead of writing data which is only displayed in this app, I can also write data to the data foundation used in the Power BI report, namely the Fabric data warehouse itself. So if I were to say, well, okay, this Victoria Street data point here, if I wanted to change this value in the database to, well, maybe it's 1000 Victoria Street, maybe they moved or something like that, I can do that with an app as well. We'll see this will trigger, and then it will take a minute for this value to flow into the report. You'll have to bear with me. The reason why this takes a little while is actually because of the direct lake functionality of the data model that I'm using. Direct lake is live, but when new data is added to the data foundation of a direct lake model, the direct lake semantic model needs to do what's called a reframing to fetch the new data that's coming in. It doesn't take many seconds, but I have not, as part of my app, prompted the API call to automatically do that reframing. So that reframing will happen in 30 seconds time or something. If we're lucky, this will, now we have 1000 Victoria Street instead of the old value there. So that took just 30 seconds or so, but I reckon we can call this almost live. I'll go a little more into detail about how this is built, of course, and the implications and what we can do to make it even more live when we get to that app. That's the second app I'm going to show you today. The third app that I've included in today's session, which I also think is a real fun one, is that I made a Power App which just embeds ChatGPT. There's no ChatGPT visualization for Power BI, or maybe there is a custom biz. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't explored that. But I built a super simple Power App which just prompts ChatGPT, one of the old models. I didn't want to pay too much money for it, but we can try and see what is the Scottish Summit Conference. Let's see if it knows that. I'm not sure that ChatGPT is quite aware of the conference, but at least it gave me an answer. I can also say, what is Denmark most known for? Let's see if we get a response. But this is just, a chat interface where we have a way to talk with an API. And this didn't have to be ChatGPT. It could have been my own organizational GPT model that I built in some Azure Studio or in Copilot Studio. It could have been another API, right? I could have gotten the weather forecast if those were the parameters I decided to send to an API. And that's the third and final extension that I'd like to show you today. So just to briefly jump back to the slides here. We're starting with this comment extension, right? And comments, of course, they are quite generic in nature, and that means they are also, well, this is by far the Power Apps extension for Power BI and Fabric that I built the most. And the time to delivery on such an extension here is, well, once you get the hang of it, it's rarely more than a day. Truth be told, sometimes we're talking hours. We're talking a Power App with some 10 controls and a single data connection, and it's very lightweight in its configuration. I most often see this in financial reports. It's great for embedding inside of a monthly P&L, something like that, in which an analyst needs to provide qualitative feedback on the data for some C-level or management to read and understand and interpret, right? In this case, what you need to know is that the solution here is also built purely out of standard licenses. The solution I'm going to show you in a second is just a Power App which connects to a SharePoint list, which obviously has certain security implications. But if we're talking non-sensitive data, this is a solution that you can perform purely on your Office license. So you don't even need a premium Power Apps license for this solution to work. Let's jump back in, and I'll show you a little bit how do you even get started with this and how is this comment app built. So the first thing that you should know when you want to build Power Apps inside of Power BI is that the best way to start is to actually create your Power App from inside of your Power BI report in the service. So what you'll do is you'll create, the shell of the report disregarding the Power Apps. You build your visualizations and the model. You'll publish it, open it in the service, and click Edit. Once you're in here, you may add a new Power Apps for Power BI visualization to your report. You will have to add at least one data field from your semantic model to this Power Apps visualization for this to turn into an app. I could just take, my product name or something like that. And then I can either choose an existing app or create a new one. When I create a new app from inside of Power BI, what will happen is there is a data element inside of my app called Power BI integration.data, which is created on behalf of us as a data source. And I'll show you in a second. If you already created your app and you want to enter it and edit it, still from edit mode, you can click the dots in the top right corner and click edit here. And this will, in a new tab of your browser, open up the Power App Studio. So in this case, we're opening up the comment app, and you can go back to your report here. That's okay. And there will now be a live connection between your Power BI report and the Power App. So if I make a selection inside of the Power BI report in a second, where I select again a data point from within my table, that will pass as a filter into my Power App. So you see the app here is loaded. You can see I've selected 1000 Victoria Street, and if I go ahead and change that to 1295 Ridge Road, if I'm lucky, this propagates over to the other tab as well. And that makes it much easier to test and debug how your app performs depending on what you click on in Power BI. And the way this whole thing happens is because of that Power BI integration.data element that I was talking about before, which you'll see it right here in the tree view of your Power App, Power BI integration. And this is a table that you can reference like it was any other data source in your app, except it doesn't show up in data sources. It shows up inside of your tree view. So the way it works is simply that, well, you can see here, I just have a single screen here, and it's basically all labels, one input field, a button, and a loading spinner. And the way we reference the data from Power BI is simply that, well, on these data labels, you can see I'm referencing Power BI integration.data. And you'll see that there is a table of data being sent from Power BI over here. If I remove the filter from Ridge Road, we should see that this element becomes a table of multiple records. Right. So that's why I'm just calling first here to ensure that we're always just getting the first result. But in reality, what will happen is that when the user selects an item, it will, of course, default to the selected item. That's kind of the whole idea here. And it's the same thing that we're doing for the rest of these labels. What we need to do from here in order to store a comment on this level of aggregation, so to say, this level of detail, is, of course, we need to input a comment, and then we need to pass that to a data source. And as the destination data source, maybe you saw me in this data source pane before, I've simply created a SharePoint list which has a country, a product, an address, a comment column. That's all. And then I'm with my submit button here. You could do this in a multitude of ways, right? I'm using a patch statement. I'll briefly go through the code in a second. Let's do that right away. With the patch statement, I'm simply showing my loading spinner. Then I'm initializing these 4 variables that I'm passing to SharePoint into local variables with width. That's just a habit of mine and very useful if you're doing multiple patch statements and both want to do updates and creates and that kind of stuff. But in reality, I'm just patching this SharePoint comment destination, and I'm saying, okay, well, look up and see if there's already a record with this country, product, and address. If that's the case, then use that to update. And if this returns blank, the coalesce function here will then use the alternative results, which is calling the defaults of the SharePoint list to create a new record. So this is basically the most concise way that you can do both create and update with one statement in Power Apps, right? Just a little bit of Power FX best practices for you there. But this little piece of code will maintain, creates and updates towards the data source on these comments. And the last piece of the puzzle to get this comment solution to work is simply that we want to default this field here to, again, look up if there are any comments in the comment table on the level of detail that we described before. So with these few building blocks, you're really able to create a solution that writes comments and takes the context of your Power BI and saves that to an external destination. In this case, a SharePoint list, only requiring basic Office licensing. You get that displayed live in your report. Now, if security is a greater concern for you, you can, of course, use a different destination rather than a SharePoint list. You're free to use Dataverse. You can use a SQL server or any other destination of your choice, bearing in mind that, of course, that will warrant premium connectors for all users of this Power BI report who needs to see the app. If a user is not licensed to use an embedded app, or if that app has not been shared with the user, it's not like the report will break. It's just the embedded app that will break. So you don't need to fear like that your monthly reporting will go crazy if you've messed up something with the licensing. Don't worry about that. I'm sure you'll just get somebody asking you why they are seeing an app that says they don't have access. So pretty low risk, really high reward, very low development costs in order to build such a comment app. And it's one of my favorite things to enhance many of our financial reports with when we build those with clients. I can highly recommend you to check that out. So that was the first solution that I wanted to show you guys. And just to, again, return to the second one in interest of time here, the write back scenario to the Fabric data warehouse is really interesting in its own right, because it allows us to modify, alter, add data to the data foundation that the report is using. And that means that the data that we're creating with the Power App can be used in our DAX calculations. It can be used in our relationships. It can be used in, any number of things. And now the use case that I'm showing you today is a master data management app. You may think, isn't it kind of crazy to maintain master data in a Power App embedded inside of Power BI? Yes, you would be right. That is a little crazy to think, but I assure you it's not worse than what many other people are doing out there with crazy Excel MDS setups. This is just another way to do it. If you're looking at a more, an alternative use case, I'd say that write back use cases are plenty, right? One of the most recent write-back applications that I did, embedded Power Apps with write-back, was also a finance application in which we wanted users to be able to add and adjust their budget values for the year. So it was an exercise that required user input through multiple rounds. They had to adjust this budget continuously over time. And we made an embedded Power App in which they could provide new input. And it was the case where we never overrode any values in the backend. We always appended. So you would always have a history of the values that was provided by the user. So there are many different use cases of doing write-back to Fabric. So if you can't wrap your head around why would I do master data management, toss that aside and focus on the technical aspect, and I'm sure we'll find a use case for this that works for your organization too. But to show you how this is built, so again, I have another Power App here. In this case, I'm feeding it country name, product name, and street address. And that's because I want the user to be able to pick a dimension that they want to update. So if they are on the address level here and say, oh, I know Victoria Street is not right, they can change that. Or if they wanted to change the product name of a product instead, they could drill up through the hierarchy, select a product, say we are at the product level, and then they could alter this product value to something else. And now how does this work? Well, let's boot up the application in edit mode and see how it's done. All right. It always just takes a second to load. And this is where, if this had been a live session, I would have asked the audience for all the great questions. I'll have to try and invent them myself, asking questions as we go. I hope you'll enjoy my monologue. It loaded here. And as you can see, again, we have a super simple Power App with, again, something like 12 controls here. It's just one screen. Half of it is labels. I have a drop-down with hard-coded values for country, product name, and address. I have a text input. This could have just been a label. I've set the display mode to be disabled. I really should just have used a label, but in this case, I am using a text input to display the existing value of the selected item, just using a switch statement to say, well, depending on if the value in the dropdown is address, product name, or country, return the respective value from the, again, Power BI integration.data table that's being passed from Power BI. Okay, that's what this one does. This is just a blank text input, no default value, no nothing. And then we have a button where the magic happens. Again, I like to show my user a loading spinner when something is loading. I'm disabling again at the end. Then again, I use a with statement to define a couple of variables. I am defining which destination table do I want to write to. And the reason why I do that is because that differs depending on which value the user wants to alter. Then we need to get the column name, which again differs depending on the selected value by the user. Then we are fetching the old value from the disabled text input and the new value from the enabled text input. And then what happens next is maybe a little surprising to some. If we were really lucky, we could just, use a patch statement against our Fabric data warehouse, because, Fabric data warehouses, they are actually configurable in your Power Apps as a data source. The way that works is let me actually just, we can do it from here. That's okay. Let me jump into my workspace. Don't save. If I go to my warehouse here, this any warehouse or lakehouse for that matter in Fabric has a SQL endpoint, a SQL connection string that we can use. You can use it in SSMS, you can use it in Azure Data Studio, or you can create a connection to it from your Power Apps. Now, the difference between warehouse and lakehouse, just super quick here, is that lakehouses are read-only, warehouses are read and write. So wouldn't it be great now that warehouses have read and write potential that I could just copy this connection string, jump into Power App Studio, connect to that SQL database. Oh, that was the wrong one. Connect to that SQL server and then do a patch statement against that one? It sure would, but there is a problem. If you try this, let me see, I have a piece of commented out code here. If I wanted to patch the customer table with a new value, right now it'll say I have invalid arguments. Sometimes it'll throw a different error. But the core of the issue is that Fabric data warehouses do not support enforced primary keys in the T-SQL layer of the warehouse. And that is required for Power Apps to use as a write destination. So because of that, we have to go about this in a little bit of a roundabout way. And basically, there are two different approaches we can take here. If we are the database and SQL kind of people, we can leverage the potential of stored procedures in our Fabric data warehouse. So when you add a new SQL Server connection, just 2 months ago, it became generally available that you can now also add any stored procedures from your database to your application. So we could prepare a stored procedure in our data warehouse to accept the input that we sent from our app and trigger write back like that. And it's super efficient. It works very well. But seeing as this is an experiment in using the Power Platform for write back, I instead went ahead and created a Power Automate flow to do this job for me. So embedded inside of my app, I have a little bit of a Power Automate flow here. But if I just open that for a second, you'll see that, well, if it loads, it's again a very, very simple piece of Power Platform work here. I have a trigger that takes 4 different variables. Those 4 that I was mentioning briefly before. We need to specify to the database which table do I want to write to, which column name do I want to modify, what's the value I want to replace, and what's the value I want to replace it with. So these are 4 variables that I'll be able to pass to the flow. Then inside of a scope here, I am simply running a raw SQL statement against that SQL connection string we were talking about before. You'll have to specify the database name as well from the dropdown. And then I'm simply running an update statement here saying, well, those 4 variables, we can just use those, right? Update the destination table, set the destination column equal to the new value where the column name was equal to the old value. And this will replace all those instances, right? It might not be best practice way to do update statements, but for the sake of demonstration, this does the trick. Then I also here have a little bit of error handling, right? So if this operation, if this scope failed, then I pass a variable back to the Power App with a status of failed. If it succeeded, I do the opposite. So what the button does, and now we've been beating around the bush long enough, I defined those 4 variables, right, if you recall. And what we do at the end is I run the name of my Power Automate flow.run. That's how you call automate flows inside of apps. And then I pass those 4 variables from my with statement as those 4 variables to the flow. You'll see how it tries to help you with these variables when you write your Power FX code. And then I store the result of that inside of a variable that I set here. Then I trigger Power BI integration.refresh. This uses, again, the Power BI integration data connector to trigger a visual refresh inside of your Power BI report. Now, I, of course, close that so that the user doesn't have to refresh their browser themselves. And then finally, and one note is this is only available if you created the Power App from inside of Power BI. So if you create your Power Apps just from makes.powerapps.com, you can use that inside of Power BI. You can even get Power BI integration to show up here, and you can use Power BI integration.data to return data. But Power BI integration.refresh will not be available to you. You need to create your Power App from inside of Power BI to get this function. Anyway, and then at the end of this code, I return based on the write back status that I stored in my variable before. I will notify the user if the write back succeeded or failed. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about this whole refresh thing is that, well, you saw during the demo, right? The write back weren't exactly instant. And that's because back when I first did this kind of extension, I was actually using direct query instead of direct lake. I was just writing to a Dataverse table and having a composite model in Power BI that referenced the Dataverse table. And with direct query, you get that data actually instant into your report. So if that's a reporting requirement that you have, that you want this data to flow into your report instantly, you should actually think about using direct query rather than direct lake. But I thought, for the sake of the argument, the idea of using an actual Fabric backend, leveraging the direct lake capabilities, we should try that out. And because we're doing so, and because of that reframing delay that happens, really this Power BI integration that refresh doesn't do anything for us right now. What we should probably rather do is, before calling this, we should probably have another Power Automate flow, which I believe there is an API endpoint that you can hit to force a metadata reframing of your direct lake semantic model. I have not tried this, but I believe that should be possible. And then after that has run, we could call Power BI integration.refresh, and we should see a more instant feedback in the report. But that's how you build a basic write-back app. And of course, this could be expanded upon with tons more functionality. Many of the write-back apps that I built would take up maybe half of the screen here and would be a solution for the finance department to perform accruals, or that budget exercise that I mentioned before, or way more complex data entry schemes where we need to fill out 20 plus fields and we need to historize the data and all kinds of stuff like that, right? That's all possible to do with these write-back applications. All right, that was two out of three. Let's swiftly jump to the next one. Next and last, I suppose. So I showed you in the beginning that we can call ChatGPT, right, from Power BI. And to me, this is the natural progression of Power BI reports in the era of AI. Why wouldn't we want our users to have a place where we can prompt a GPT model for more insight? Maybe Copilot will solve this in time, right? I know at least already Copilot, if you're on an F64 capacity in Fabric or above, and you have Copilot accessibility, I'm not even sure if it's actually getting out of preview just now or if it's still in preview, but you can prompt your semantic model and ask your semantic model for insights. But what if we wanted to ask about more company generic things, right? Then we could just point to our company GPT model and ask about that organizational hierarchy that we are also displaying in Power BI, or get contextual information about those products that we're showing to get an idea of what we're actually seeing in the app. Basically, embedding GPT extensions in your Power BI and Fabric solutions is a way to patch some of the holes that the developer would not foresee, right? Or is maybe not feasible due to the amount of users in the solution. You're not able to accommodate the needs of all users of an app with all the data they need at all times. So if you need that contextual information about, say again, product names, something like a LookUp extension with ChatGPT that allows you to return that information could be very, very useful. And the way you build such an extension, if we again jump back into our report and open this one. Oh, pop-up blocked. Okay, that's new. Strange that that didn't happen with the first ones. Let's try again. There we go. So the way this works is, again, one screen and something like 10 controls. And the big kicker here is that we leverage a custom connector to interface the ChatGPT API. And originally, when I built this demo, I actually went ahead and built the custom connector myself. And then right as I wrapped up and kind of finished, I realized that the good Robin Rosengrün, he had published his connector as well for everybody to use. So if you try to add a new data source and you search ChatGPT, there are publicly available, independently published data sources that will allow you to interface ChatGPT. All you need to do to use this connector, when you add it, you need to feed it with an API token. So you need to go to OpenAI, or if you're using an internal API connector, you will have to build your own custom connector. But basically, you'll need to figure out the authentication stuff And then it's more or less smooth sailing from there. There's a little bit of complexity in the app, but I'll get to that in a second. So the way this works is that I have a gallery here, which I intend to use to display both the questions asked by the user and the answers coming back from the GPT model. Then I just have a simple text input used for asking questions, and I have an icon here used as a button to prompt the GPT model. So the way it works is that this looks a little bit complex, right? But basically, I am calling my data connector, OpenAI independent publisher .chat completion, the method from the custom connector. And I'm saying use the model GPT 3.5 Turbo. I could use other models, but this is cheap enough that I don't have to worry about putting more than $5 worth of credits into my OpenAI account. And what I feed this is a single record in which I define the role of user as the person asking the question and the content as the text input field that I have at the bottom. Now this I will collect into called ChatGPT message, because I want to also store my question in a collection that I can return in the gallery. Then what I do is that I save the result of this call into a variable called var ChatGPT response. And actually, let's just run this again. What is Denmark known for? And this will just take a second because the response is rather long. The longer the response, the longer it will take to return. But just to show you guys what's happening in the code, if I now click call ChatGPT message, no, let me show it in a different way. Let me show you what's in var ChatGPT response first. So here you will see that I get a record of data that has that has a table inside of these choices. And what I need to do is first I collected the question from the user inside of call ChatGPT message, and then I'm saying into the same collection also collect the first message inside of that variable's choices that we just saw. So this one will return my entire content, and it will also have the role of assistant. And that means that now my collection contains 2 rows of data. The first row is my question with the user role, and the second is the answer with the assistant role. And now all that's left really is to build my gallery. And in my gallery here, I have simply put in a profile image in which I do a conditional statement and say, if the role is user, then use the user image. Otherwise, use the ChatGPT logo that I just uploaded into my app. And then also I'm using the alignment somewhere, or the X property in this case, and say, well, depending on the user role, either use 16 or width -80 to place the profile image in the right place. Then the body is just this item.content. That will be the question for the user and the answer for the GPT model. And in this case, I simply change the alignment to be either align left or align right, depending on the role. That's all there is to it. That's building a chatbot inside of Power Apps, right? We could spend a lot of time building custom connectors and all that. If you just need to connect to ChatGPT, use Robin's excellent connector. It just works. It's great. If you need to interface your organizational GPT model, talk to your developers about how to interface that API. It will probably have other method names, and you'll need to authenticate either with a token or with some kind of login, and you should hopefully be able to figure that out and get context aware or at least organizational aware responses, right? This GPT model doesn't know who I'm working for, doesn't know anything about my organization's data. But if you used your custom GPT model, that could be the case. So we're approaching the end of the session here. But what I wanted to leave you with, and unfortunately I cannot show this to you because my employer just recently made a change to our office system. But what I had actually prepared a slide for, I have an empty slide here, is that I wanted to show you that all of this works inside of PowerPoint. So if you in your organization have the fortune that Power BI tiles have not been blocked by your administrator, you can go ahead and add a Power BI tile to your PowerPoint and simply point it to that Power BI report that you have embedded your apps in, and the apps will be fully functional inside of the PowerPoint as well. I think that's mind-blowing. So you can basically do data write back from PowerPoint. I think that's crazy, but also genius. But really, it's crazy. And the good thing is that it does respect your security model. So if the user opening that PowerPoint, which has write back capabilities, does not have access to either the Power BI report or the Power App that's embedded in the Power BI report, or is missing a license, or is if you through the app are using AD credentials to authenticate against the data source, it will always ask what is the user who's logged in to PowerPoint. It will respect that. So it's not dangerous to embed this kind of solution inside of PowerPoint. I think that's amazing. I mean, again, consider the CEO, or maybe not the CEO, but the whoever finance manager who still wants his monthly reporting in a PowerPoint. Gone are the days of taking screenshots of your Power BI reports, right? You should embed that Power BI report in your PowerPoint, first of all. And second of all, even those comments made with your embedded Power App will show up and be live. And he could even add his own comments. He or she could add his own comments from inside of that embedded Power App in the embedded Power BI report. That's really power inception to me. So I think that that's almost where I want to leave it at. I think we'll leave the Power Automate extensions for another session at another time. If you want to check out some of that functionality, you are more than welcome to find me on social media. I do blog about those extensions all the time. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. If you want to get hold of some supplying material, find me on GitHub. If you're curious about other sessions that I might be presenting, feel free to find me on SessionEyes. And if you have a cool conference that you want me to speak at, you're always welcome to reach out. So again, thank you so much to the sponsors of Scottish Summit, Proximo 3, Locodera, Riata Consultancy, and Cubix. It's excellent that there are people willing to pitch in to hold these conferences afloat, and I really appreciate the fact that they are here. I also appreciate you for tuning in to my session here, and I hope I get to come by sometime in the future to actually present in person. But that was it for me. Thank you so much.